Hey friends, tonight's story begins not with a miracle, not with a lottery ticket, but with a small pot of soup. A rainy afternoon in a rundown housing complex where the smell of cilantro and celery lingers in a cramped kitchen drifting through a cracked wall. This is the story of Elena, a single mom with her hair tied back by a worn-out elastic, dark circles under her eyes from sleepless nights, and a heart still wide enough to share even when the fridge holds nothing but a faded plastic container labeled vegetable soup. Now, if you think giving away your last meal to a stranger is foolish, you might want to buckle up, because sometimes it only takes a single ladle of broth to turn an entire life around. So before you settle in, go ahead and like the video and subscribe, but only if what we share here truly speaks to you. And drop us a comment below. Tell us where you're listening from and what time it is over there. Now, turn off the lights, let the soft hum of a fan breeze in the background, and drift with us into tonight's story. The rain started around 5 p.m. in Easton. Not a harsh storm, just that steady kind of drizzle that finds its way down the back of your collar through the leaks in old roofs. Elena tiptoed down the wooden hallway, holding a wilted bag of greens from the morning's food bank. Her shoes squeaked softly on the damp floor. Inside room 3, her 7-year-old son, Caleb, was stacking cardboard pieces into robots, whispering, "Private camouflage is moving in." He didn't know that his mother had just been cut from her weekend hours at the laundromat for missing 3 shifts to take care of him during a fever. Elena lit the stove and poured water. Her hands, used to gripping a steering wheel, fumbled with the nearly empty lighter. She exhaled. Just one more meal. On the shelf, a single can of red beans. She shook it. It rattled. Good. She opened it, dumped it in the pot, added the greens, a pinch of salt that was gone too. "It's okay," she murmured. "A bit of rain will season it. Just fine." Thunder rumbled softly outside. Elena placed the soup on the table and divided it into 2 bowls. Not much, just enough for a mother and son to pretend there was chicken, maybe even toast. "Did you see that man again?" Mama Caleb asked, scooping his first spoonful. "What man?" "The one sitting under the stairs with the black gloves." Elena paused. She had seen a shadow earlier when she took out the trash. Gray coat hood pulled up hunched beside the fire escape. But here, almost everyone is just a shadow in someone else's eyes at some point. She smiled, brushing his hair. Maybe he was just keeping dry. But deep in her eyes something lingered, a flicker of instinct, like the sound of a spoon hitting the bottom of an empty bowl, signaling the end of something, or the beginning. And outside, the rain had not stopped. The rain kept tapping on the tin roof like a visitor who wouldn't take no for an answer. Inside room 3, roughly 200 square feet, with a single bed pushed against the wall and a dining table cluttered with first-grade homework, Elena was trying to stay calm as she dialed a number she knew by heart. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from how often she'd already played this ending. At her feet, Caleb was still playing, rolling his toy car across the broken tiles. A damp slip of paper lay tilted on the table reading, "Rent overdue, $192.75. A raindrop from the leaky ceiling had already smudged the ink. "Ring, ring, ring." "Yeah," a man's voice, rough, impatient. "This is Elena." From room 3. "I just wanted to ask for 3 more days. That's all. Just 3. I swear I can get it by then." Silence. Then a sigh. "You owe me 4 weeks. There are no more 3 days. I understand, but my son's been sick. I lost work." She heard the TV flipping channels on his end. "Look, I'm not running a charity. If it's not paid by tomorrow, I'm changing the locks." Click. A cold, sharp end, like someone cutting off a song mid-chorus. Elena stood frozen. She didn't cry. Even tears, it seemed, were being rationed now, like the food in her fridge. Outside the window, raindrops sketched crooked mazes down the glass. The old radio on top of the fridge crackled to life. Billionaire Charles Hawthorne has officially stepped down from the Pioneer Group board. Rumors say he may be donating his entire fortune to a secret charitable trust. Elena turned the volume down. A crooked smile tugged at her lips. "Wish he'd walk into this dump," she whispered. Outside, a shadow appeared again beneath the stairwell. Same gray coat, same hood. She glanced at it, then drew the curtain closed. Not out of fear, but because truly she had nothing left to give. Unless her eyes fell on the second bowl of soup cooling on the table, except maybe half of what's left. Caleb looked up. "Mama, are we finishing dinner?" Elena nodded, smiling. "You eat the rest, sweetie. Mama's already full." It was the kind of line single mothers learn to say like it's nothing, as if hunger can be postponed as long as your child eats first. But outside, the man in the black gloves was still sitting there, rain tapping on his hood, shoes soaked. And what Elena didn't know was that he'd heard every word of that phone call. The rain had eased, but the air remained heavy with dampness, that kind that sneaks under collars and makes you shiver even without wind. Elena had just tucked Caleb under his blanket, folding the edges of his workbook, the corners still wet. He had drifted off mid-sentence, murmuring nonsense in his dreams, probably still battling cardboard robots in his sleep. She rose quietly and walked to the sink. The second bowl of soup, the one she'd said she was too full to eat, still sat on the table. But she wasn't hungry anymore, not because she was full, because emptiness had already filled the space where her stomach used to rumble. Then a sound, soft, like a sigh. Cough, cough. Elena froze. Not Caleb, not the neighbor next door, the elderly cat lady who always fell asleep with the rain. It was a wet, rasping cough. Tired, weak. She cracked the window open. There he was. The man, still there under the corridor's overhang, leaning against the wall, hood pulled down low. Only the black gloves and the frayed canvas bag beside him were visible. The flickering neon light overhead cast a pale yellow over his skin. But what caught her eye wasn't the skin tone or the hood. It was his feet, soaked, pale, no socks, and a torn piece of cardboard beneath him, completely useless against the cold. She looked back inside at the now cooling bowl of soup. A quiet tug-of-war unfolded in her mind. That's the last meal, and yet he doesn't even have a bowl. Elena packed the soup into a plastic container, added the last disposable spoon, and stepped out barefoot, not wanting her shoes, to wake Caleb. The rain on the gutter above her head sounded like slow, deliberate applause. "Sir," she called softly, as though afraid to wake an entire world that had fallen asleep. The man looked up, his eyes not desperate, not pleading, just calm, almost knowing. "Elena," he said, voice hoarse and low like AM radio at midnight. "You don't have to do this." She froze. "You know my name." He nodded, accepting the soup. "I've been here since morning, heard you humming to your son, heard you make that call, heard you say you were already full." Elena stiffened. "I didn't mean to eavesdrop," he added, quickly, eyes on the soup. "It's just, today's really cold." She stayed quiet, gently placing the container in his hands. "I didn't have enough salt," she whispered. "We ran out." The man chuckled. Not a perfect, gleaming smile, just honest. "Do you know, you just changed something," Elena shrugged, turning back toward her door. "I just gave away a bowl of soup," and the door clicked shut behind her, softly, but loud enough to divide two worlds. Inside, a small room with a sleeping child. Outside, a quiet man sitting in the rain. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to begin something neither of them could yet imagine. The next morning held no sunlight, just a pale gray glow through the window, the kind that makes you wonder whether a new day is beginning, or just dragging the old one along. Elena rose early. She washed her face with cold water the heater had broken last winter and never got fixed. Still echoing in her mind was the stranger's quiet voice from the night before. "You know, you just changed something, right?" At the time, she had thought he meant it as a thank you, but now it echoed differently, as if he knew something she didn't. She stepped outside to check if he was still there. Nothing. The hallway was empty. No sign of the man, no soup container, not even a footprint. Only a faint wet patch on the tiles, like someone had sat there through the night and faded into morning. Back in the room, she dried Caleb's hair with a towel. He had just woken up, eyes still sticky with sleep, but already chatting. "Mom, did you give him dinner last night?" Elena nodded. "Yeah, I figured he needed it more than I did." Caleb thought for a moment, then said, "Then I bet he thinks you're a superhero." Elena chuckled, though her throat tightened a bit. "If superheroes were behind on rent, I'd be the first of their kind." Caleb sat at the table, flipping open his homework. "Mom, do we still get to live here?" Elena paused. She didn't want to lie, but didn't want to scare him either. Finally, she placed a gentle hand on his head. "We'll find another place, maybe with a newer stove and bigger windows." She didn't mention that she'd already packed most of their things into 2 cloth bags, or that she'd messaged her sister out of state asking if they could stay for a few days. Those were grown-up worries. Caleb didn't need to carry them. Outside, the sky turned from gray to grayer, but when Elena stepped out to check the mailbox, she stopped cold. There was something tucked into the door handle, a $50 bill folded neatly clipped to a small piece of paper. In delicate handwriting it read, "For the soup, a little from the heart." No name, no address. The writing was elegant with that slightly slanted curve of someone who once learned penmanship with a fountain pen. Elena stood still, stunned. Not because of the money, though, for her $50 might as well have been a downpour during a drought, but because no one in this complex wrote like that. She glanced around. No one in the hallway, no cameras, only the soft hum of a washing machine at the end of the hall and the faint scent of laundry detergent in the air. She held the note in her hand for a long time, her mind racing with possibilities. Who was it him, but why, and if it was? Why write like a retired professor from inside Caleb, called out Mom. "I found the plastic spoon from last night." Elena folded the note, slipped it into her pocket, and looked up at the overcast sky. She didn't know what tomorrow held, but for the first time in months, she felt a sliver of light ease into her chest, not because of the $50, but because of the words "a little from the heart." Sometimes people don't need miracles. They just need to know they're not invisible. 3 days. That was all the time Elena had, not because someone gave it to her, but because she was silently counting down herself. She used the $50 to buy groceries and a cheap bus ticket heading north to the state where her sister once said, "If you ever need it, there's always space here." But Elena had never called, not out of pride, just because she knew everyone was struggling in their own way. And sometimes knocking on someone's door when your hands are empty feels heavier than sleeping on the street. Those final days in room 3 passed like the room itself knew it was being left behind. The peeling walls stopped feeling damp. The window oddly no longer creaked in the wind. Even the flickering bulb, the one that had blinked for 2 weeks straight, shone steady. Caleb must have sensed something too. He didn't ask many questions. He just sat quietly and drew a picture, a small house, a mother, and an old man with a silver beard reaching out to take a bowl of soup. "That's you, Mama," he said, "and that's the soup wizard. He's gonna turn our house into a castle." Elena laughed. "A castle, huh? I'd settle for a stove that doesn't smell like smoke." She didn't tell him that tomorrow night would be their last here. She also didn't mention that this morning the landlord had slid one final notice under the door, stamped in red ink, lock change 9 a.m. 0 a.m. December 12th. Instead, she spent the evening teaching him how to fold paper boats from an old newspaper. Then they stood under the awning and released them into the rain, mother and son watching those tiny boats float away fragile and stubborn just like them. That final night, Elena packed everything into 2 cloth bags. One held clothes Caleb's storybooks and an old university hoodie she'd kept all these years. The other held things no one could see. Photocopies of job applications, rejection letters from 7 places, and the handwritten note, "A little from the heart." She didn't throw that one away. There was something about the handwriting, the precision of someone who lived neatly, the choice of words from someone who had seen life, and a calmness rarely found, as if the person writing hadn't just said thank you, but had laid down a piece of their soul. Around 1 a.m., Elena lay beside Caleb. The blanket barely covered them both. A dim yellow light spilled in from the hallway. She lay still, didn't cry, didn't pray, didn't hope. Only whispered a single thought in her mind. "If we have to leave tomorrow, I just hope someone remembers we were here and that we tried to be kind." And as she drifted into sleep out in the hallway, soft footsteps passed by. They paused in front of room 3 for a moment, then moved on. Once again, Elena didn't know. She was being watched, not by cameras, but by an unseen pair of eyes, quiet but remembering everything. That morning the sun didn't rise. Not really. It just slowly made the sky less dark, as if even the light wasn't quite ready to begin the day. Elena was up before Caleb. She zipped up their 2 cloth bags, washed her face with cold water, and brewed the last 2 packets of instant coffee, a small ritual that didn't make her feel more awake, just a little less cold. The clock on the wall clicked to 8:12 a.m. She had less than an hour before the lock on their room would be changed. Elena was about to head out and find the bus ticket already folded in her coat pocket route, memorized from the night before when she paused. There was something wedged into the door handle, a piece of paper, folded in thirds, not wet, not crumpled, no envelope, no logo, but the fold so precise, so neat, the kind of fold you'd expect from a banker or a librarian. She opened it. Inside one single line, and a phone number. "I am Charles Hawthorne. Call this number if you truly have nothing left to lose." Elena stood motionless, like someone had just whispered a secret into her ear from another world. Charles Hawthorne, the name she'd heard on the radio last week, founder of the Pioneer Group, one of the wealthiest men on the East Coast, and according to rumor, a man who'd vanished from the financial world after selling off his assets and refusing all interviews. She shook her head. No, this had to be a mistake, or someone's idea of a joke. Maybe a bored neighbor who watched too much late-night TV. But the handwriting, it was the same as the note A, little from the heart. Elena looked again at the number. 10 digits, no extension, no signs of a scam. She picked up her phone. Her finger hovered over the screen. And as always, just when a person is hesitating, there was a knock at the door. Elena. The dry voice belonged to the landlord. "I'm here to change the lock." As posted, Elena glanced at Caleb, still asleep, clutching a torn comic book. "Yes." "I'll be right out," she replied. She pressed the call button. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a voice answered. Low, calm, familiar. "Hello, Elena. I've been waiting for your call." She froze. The hallway suddenly felt still, like time had held its breath. Who is this?" "This is Charles. Don't hang up. Please listen. I'm at the cafe on the corner just 3 blocks from you. If you're willing, I'll be there to pick you and Caleb up in 15 minutes. Elena looked toward the door. The landlord was jiggling his keys, mumbling something about schedules. "Why me?" she asked aloud. The man on the phone chuckled, not the kind that mocks, but the kind that has heard this question 100 times. "Because you're the only one who gave away your last meal," without asking who it was for. The line went dead. No confirmation, no promises, just silence and a choice. Elena looked at her son, at the 2 bags, at the door slowly swinging open. Then, on instinct, she grabbed her coat, gently nudged Caleb awake, and whispered, "Sweetheart, let's go get some coffee." Caleb rubbed his eyes. "Do we have money?" Mama Elena smiled softly. "No, but maybe." Someone just offered us a cup. The cafe sat quietly at the intersection, nestled between a laundromat and a barber shop. Above it, an old apartment with faded floral curtains drooped in the morning light. The sign out front read, "Harriet's Cafe, since 1978, gently swaying in the breeze like it was nodding hello to the first guest of the day. Elena had never stepped inside before. People like her usually walked past places like this, places with tablecloths and coffee that cost more than $3, didn't welcome unemployed single moms. She held Caleb's hand as they walked in. The door chimed softly like someone whispering a name that hadn't been spoken in a long time. The cafe was warm, not just in temperature, but in spirit. Warm like the smell of hand-roasted coffee and the clink of silver spoons on porcelain. At the far end near the window sat a man. White dress shirt, gray silk tie, cropped silver hair. His gaze, calm and steady, gave the feeling that he'd known her for a very long time. Elena recognized him instantly, not from photos, but from his eyes. The eyes of the man who had sat in the rain-black gloves on his hands, soup in his lap. She tightened her grip on Caleb's hand and stepped closer. "You're Charles," he said gently with a small smile. "And this must be Caleb." "Hello, young man." Caleb tucked behind her, peeking from behind her coat. "Don't worry," Charles said softly. "If I meant harm, I'd have done it long before now, out there in the hallway." Elena sat down, still keeping a cautious distance. She looked at him, hesitating. "Why me?" she asked. "I mean, there are thousands out there who need help more, who are more qualified than me." Charles poured himself some tea from a white porcelain pot, slowly, deliberately, like an English lord conducting a cabinet meeting. "You know," he said, "for over 10 years, I've donated millions to charities, supported hundreds of causes, and still, it felt meaningless. Every number passed through accountants' foundation boards, spreadsheets. No one ever really saw a person." Elena listened. There was something in his voice, not regret, but exhaustion. The weariness of someone who had gone too far too fast and forgotten the smallest things. "So I tried something different," Charles continued. "I disappeared, let go of the houses, the titles, and I asked myself, if I had nothing, would anyone give me something?" He looked her in the eyes. "And you gave me a bowl of soup." Elena flushed, trying to smile. "I just thought you needed it more than I did." "No," Charles shook his head. His gaze softened. "You didn't give because I needed it. You gave because you couldn't bear to see someone cold and hungry without something warm in their hands. That's kindness without conditions, and that makes it priceless." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The cafe's espresso machine hissed gently in the background, like a quiet soundtrack to a story neither of them had finished telling. Then Charles reached into his coat and pulled out a thick envelope. He placed it gently on the table. "This," he said, "is a contract. I want you to run a community kitchen. I'm building a place where single mothers can always get a warm meal. Of course you'll be paid, more than any job you've ever had." Elena stared at the envelope. "I don't have a degree. I've never run anything. I just know how to stretch a dollar and cook on an old stove." "Exactly," he said. "That's why I believe you can do it." She glanced at Caleb, busy tracing the edge of a coffee spoon, then back at him. "But why do you trust me?" Charles smiled slightly. "Because the kind of person who gives away their last bowl of soup is exactly the kind of person I trust to run an entire kitchen." Harriet's Cafe had that kind of warmth people like Elena usually only saw through a window. the amber pendant lights casting soft glows on polished oak, the lace-trimmed tablecloths, the menus printed in sepia ink on ivory paper. This place didn't sell coffee, it sold peace. And Elena, for most of her life, had only known the kind of places where coffee came in paper cups and customers had to stand. She still couldn't fully believe what she had just heard. A contract, a job, a place built for people like her, offered by someone like him. "Weren't you scared?" she asked, her voice softer than the clink of a spoon against porcelain. "To hand such a big opportunity to someone who has nothing." Charles looked out the window where the rain had stopped at some point, leaving glassy streaks across the pavement and mirrored flashes from passing trucks. "Of course I was," he said, no hesitation. "I used to be afraid of losing money, afraid of being used, afraid of trusting the wrong person. But then I realized, what's more frightening is living your whole life not trusting anyone at all." He turned to her, meeting her gaze. "For someone like me, $1 million is a handshake. For someone like you, a bowl of soup is a decision." Elena didn't know what to say. Everything felt too large to fit inside a simple thank you. Caleb sat beside her, still fiddling with the coffee spoon, but his eyes never left the man. Maybe he understood more than he let on. Something beyond the bedtime stories his mother used to tell. Elena glanced down at the contract. It wasn't printed on standard copy paper. It was heavy, cotton-textured, stamped, and at the top one line was already filled in Elena Marlowe, Community Director, the Shelter Spoon. Her lips parted. I don't know if I'm worthy," Charles gently interrupted. "No one is. You become worthy by choosing to live kindly, one day at a time." He reached for a napkin, wiped his glasses, then smiled. "And besides, I'm not giving you anything. I'm simply returning to the world what I owed it, for far too long." Elena held the contract in both hands. They trembled slightly, not out of fear, but because for the first time in her life, someone didn't ask where she studied, how many jobs she'd been turned down for, or how many months behind she was on rent. They only saw that she had once shared her last meal and never asked for anything back. The waitress brought over 3 mugs of hot chocolate, one for Charles, one for Elena, and a small one with whipped cream on top for Caleb. The boy let out a soft cheer and glanced at his mother, seeking silent permission. "Go ahead, sweetheart," Elena said, her voice warm and quiet. "Maybe today. We're not strangers in this cafe anymore." And in that moment she no longer felt out of place among the polished tables and quiet chatter, because for the first time in her life, Elena had stepped into a place that wasn't meant for someone like her, and been welcomed as if she'd owned the key all along. Elena had read about Charles Hawthorne before. Not much, just enough to remember his name, graced a few Forbes covers, always accompanied by a headline like, "Success doesn't come from luck. It comes from never softening." But the man sitting across from her now, there was nothing sharp about him, just the quiet steadiness of someone who had once stood at the top of the world and chose to come down barefoot. She sipped her hot chocolate and asked gently, "You're really the Charles Hawthorne, the man who once owned Pioneer Group?" He gave a slight nod, like the question was about a former restaurant he used to run, nothing more. "Once owned, once ran. Once believed I could bend the market with a single frown." Elena looked at him, 1,000 questions flooding her, but none quite forming into words. And then he continued, his voice as steady as a clock's ticking. "I realized I couldn't control the one thing that mattered most: loneliness." He reached into his coat and pulled out an old photo, faded color curled at the corners. A woman in a wool coat stood beside him, hand in hand. She wasn't looking at the camera. She was looking at him like he was the entire frame. "My wife, Margaret, passed away 6 years ago, pancreatic cancer. We didn't catch it in time." Elena said nothing, just nodded, small and quiet enough not to stir the memory. The day she died, Charles said, I realized I'd built an entire financial empire, but never managed to build a single ordinary morning with the person I loved most. He looked up toward the cafe ceiling, eyes dry, but voice hollow, each word like a soft cut into something still tender. I didn't need more money. I needed something that made me feel human again. Then he turned back to Elena, and in his eyes she saw something she never expected to find in a millionaire's gaze: faith. That's why I walked away from everything, lived like someone with nothing, no assistance, no names. I needed to know, beneath the layers of suits and power, was I still someone people would treat like a person? He paused, letting the words settle like rain through branches. And only you gave me your last bowl of soup without asking who I was, without expecting anything in return. Elena clasped her hands in her lap. Her throat tightened. Honestly, I didn't do anything big. You were hungry. I've been hungry too. That's all. Charles nodded, like that was the answer he'd been chasing across cities' shelters and sleepless streets. That's exactly why he said, I didn't choose you because you were poor. I chose you because you still had faith even when life had stripped almost everything away. Elena bit her lip, trying to hide the surge of emotion rising in her chest, something between gratitude, disbelief, and quiet fear that she might not be enough for what was coming. Charles smiled gently. You don't have to do anything grand. Just do something small, in a way no one else quite can. At that moment, Harriet's cafe no longer felt like just a coffee shop. It became a quiet little stage where only 3 people sat: a single mother, a 7-year-old boy, and a disguised millionaire playing out a scene no one else knew had reached its quiet climax. Elena leaned back in her chair, gently tracing the edge of the contract resting on the table. Her mind felt like a room too small, suddenly crowded with too many questions. Why me? Can I really do this? Or is this all just a test? And yet, in the eye of that storm of doubt, Charles's voice echoed like a grounding truth. I don't need pity, Elena. I need what's real. He hadn't said it like a plea, but like a realization, a conclusion drawn after a lifetime of polite nods and perfectly rehearsed handshakes. Elena looked up. How many people have you tested like this? Charles smiled faintly. More than I can count. Some smiled, then stepped back. Some handed me spare change, along with a look of disgust, and some pretended I didn't exist. I think they were scared, Elena said, her voice quieter now. Scared of being tricked. Scared to help the wrong person. Charles nodded. And that's why people choose safety, but pity mixed with fear. That's charity. And I'm not looking for charity. I'm looking for someone who knows how to share. Elena stared at her hands, the same hands that had held a plastic soup spoon, knocked on a laundromat door to beg for extra shifts, and comforted her feverish son in nights without medicine. She whispered, I don't know if I'm as good as you think. Some days I only get out of bed because Caleb needs breakfast. Some days I curse the sky. Some days I wonder if disappearing would be easier. Charles didn't respond right away. He poured more tea, as if even time itself needed to slow down and listen. And yet, he said slowly, you still gave your last bowl of soup to a stranger. You still didn't wake your son just to eat your half. You still chose kindness when nothing around you was kind. He set the cup down, eyes meeting hers. That's not because you're perfect. That's because you're real, and I'd rather put my faith in a messy truth than a polished lie. Silence fell over the table, soft and honest, like powdered sugar settling on warm bread. Then Caleb broke it, whispering, Mom always shares her dessert with me, but she never says I should be grateful. She just says, cake tastes better when someone else is eating it with you. Charles laughed for the first time since they met. Elena, he said, that's why I need you, not to hand out meals like pity, but to run a kitchen where every bowl comes with something real, a caring question, a look of respect, a thank you that doesn't make anyone feel ashamed. He slid the contract closer to her. The building's ready. The kitchen is installed. All I'm missing is someone to keep the fire going. Elena sat silently for a long moment, then nodded, not like she was agreeing, more like someone finally exhaling after holding their breath too long. Inside there were no fireworks, just a strange, quiet stillness, like the world had finally stopped spinning in reverse. That morning the sky still held no sun, but inside Elena a thread of light had begun to slip through the thick clouds of doubt. She stepped out of Harriet's cafe, the contract in her hand, not gripped tightly like a lifeline, but held gently as if it were something too fragile to squeeze. Charles walked beside her in silence. He didn't need to speak. From the moment she nodded, something had shifted between them. No longer giver and receiver, but two survivors. One who had survived fame, and one who had survived scarcity. He stopped in front of a small beige delivery van parked along the curb, the kind of van only people from tight alley neighborhoods would appreciate, big enough to carry dreams, small enough to go unnoticed. "Hop in," he said. "I want to show you something." Elena hesitated, but then she turned to Caleb, still jumping between sidewalk puddles like the whole world was one big rainy day game, and she nodded. The van rolled through 3 blocks, then turned down a narrow back street where few would ever bother to look. There, painted in faded letters on an old red brick wall, "Wellington Soup Kitchen closed since 2015. "I used to walk by here," Elena said quietly. "They used to serve lunch to the homeless." Charles stepped out of the van, keys jangling as he unlocked the gate. "Now," he said, "it belongs to you." Elena froze. In front of her stood a dusty space, but the window still caught the light, and the industrial kitchen inside still held the shape of a place once alive with hands and heat. "I don't understand," she whispered. "You don't need to," Charles said gently. "Just listen to this starting today. This place will reopen, but not as a soup charity. It'll be called the Shelter Spoon, a place where people don't just get food. They get heard. They get called by name. They don't need to prove how poor they are to feel like they belong." Elena stepped inside. Beneath the dust, the tile floors were old but firm. To the left, a stainless steel sink. To the right, a spice rack. Everything waiting for someone to bring it back to life. "And you," Charles added, "will be the heartbeat of this place. I don't want a manager locked in an office. I need someone at the stove, someone who knows how to ladle soup and ladle trust into every bowl." She turned to him. "What about you? Where will you be?" Charles smiled, the kind of smile from someone who had walked far and now chose to stand quietly in the wings. "I may have poured the first bowl, but you'll be the one who keeps the fire going." Elena looked around her hand, brushing over the old oven handle, then sliding gently across the wooden counter, the broken pieces of something that once was, now, maybe the foundation of something truer than any dream she'd dared to have. "I've never been given power before," she said softly. "Well then," Charles replied, "let this be your first time." And in that moment, no applause, no spotlight, just one woman standing in an empty kitchen, knowing that everything was about to begin again, because of one act she once thought was the end. 3 weeks later, the lights in the old kitchen flickered on for the first time in nearly a decade. Not the cold fluorescent kind, but a warm golden glow, soft like late afternoon sunlight. It illuminated the dust still clinging to the corners, but never made anyone feel like they were being inspected. Elena stood in the heart of that kitchen, shirt sleeves rolled up to her elbows, hair tied back, apron stained with a dried spot of tomato near the right hip. Next to her stood Caleb, scribbling on paper food boxes with a thick black marker, his big, uneven letters declaring today's special honey-glazed carrots. "You'll love it," The Shelter Spoon. The name now printed above the door opened without a ribbon-cutting ceremony, without a press release, and without any honored guests. But that morning 4 people came. Mrs. Henderson from the end of the block, who hadn't left her house since losing her son in the war. Mr. Ron, the retired hospital janitor who didn't come to eat, but to ask need help carrying anything, and the Tierney twins, 13 years old, who had begged their mom to let them come early and peel potatoes. No one got paid. No one asked about pay, and yet everyone felt invited. Elena stood at the far end of the kitchen watching the scene unfold. It was almost surreal, strangers sitting together, not rushing, not asking what each other did for work. She turned to look at the man seated quietly near the door, Charles in a baseball cap and rolled-up sleeves, looking for all the world like just another older neighbor enjoying hot soup and cornbread. "How long do you think this'll last?" she asked, half joking. Charles raised an eyebrow, scooping up another spoonful. "If you keep seasoning like today, a long, long time." They both laughed, not loud but honest. The kind of laugh shared by people who know something beautiful has begun, and it's not small anymore. Later that afternoon, as the last visitors trickled out, Elena spotted a folded note left quietly on the counter. She opened it. No name. "Thank you for not asking who I was. Only whether I was hungry." She folded the note, tucked it into her apron pocket, right beside the old one that read, "A little from the heart." Caleb ran up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "We made lots of new friends today, huh?" "Mama, yeah," Elena said, still gazing at the window where the orange light of sunset cast shadows on the sink. "And you know what tomorrow might be even more." "Will we have enough food?" She knelt down, whispering with a grin. "If not, I'll make something out of nothing. And if we're still short, we'll split what we have." I still remember how to do that. That evening, Elena had planned to wash all the stainless steel trays before heading home. She was elbow deep in soapy water when Mrs. Henderson, who had stayed behind to help tidy up, turned on the small TV in the kitchen's corner. The old set hung crooked on the wall, usually only playing weather reports or afternoon crossword shows. The 6 o'clock news began as usual. Stock market shifts a wildfire out west, a slight rise in gas prices. And then, in a narrow alley in Easton, a long-abandoned soup kitchen has reopened after nearly 10 years. But what sets it apart isn't the soup, or even the honey-glazed carrots. It's how it's run by a single mother who was once evicted for giving her last meal to a stranger. Elena froze. Soapy water slid slowly down her sleeve. On screen, a clip of her in her green apron hair, loosely tied, smiling as she ladled soup into paper bowls. There was Caleb, too, the small boy, carefully writing, "What's for dinner?" on the whiteboard by the door. Charles was nowhere to be seen, as if he had directed it all from the shadows and stepped away before the curtain rose. No one expected this kitchen to survive. The anchor continued. But through kindness and the trust of one stranger, the Shelter Spoon has become a place that serves not just food, but a message. We don't need to be perfect to start being kind. Caleb, sitting beside Elena, now stared at the screen. "Is that you, Mama? You're on TV." Elena laughed, nodding. "Looks like it." The boy looked at her again, this time, slower, more intently, as if trying to memorize something far beyond the image. "You know what he said?" Thoughtful. "I don't think you just make soup." Elena tilted her head. "No, then what am I making?" Caleb shrugged. "You make people feel hungry, the kind of hungry where they want to eat with someone else." Elena stilled. His words, simple, childlike, felt like they'd been lifted from a book too old and too wise for anyone to remember. On screen, the segment ended with a photo, Elena and Caleb, standing at the kitchen's entrance beneath the freshly painted sign, "The Shelter Spoon," white letters, on raw wood hanging from 2 chains that swayed in the breeze. The screen faded to black. The kitchen was quiet again, save for the soft drip of water from the sink and the hum of the overhead light. Elena dried her hands and looked out the kitchen window. She didn't feel like she'd just been on TV. She only felt that someone out there was still hungry, not for food, but for the feeling of being called by name, for being listened to, for having someone share a little piece of this vast, often cold world. A week after the news segment aired, the Shelter Spoon began to see more visitors. Not a flood, just enough so that each evening the large soup pots scraped the bottom. People didn't come just for free food. They came because it felt like someone had been waiting for them. A seat, a spoon, a place at the table. Elena still cooked every morning, wiped every table, wrote small notes on every to-go box. She never told anyone that she had once had nothing left to give, and maybe no one needed to ask. Because here in this kitchen everyone had arrived from somewhere cracked, and no one had to prove they were worthy of soup. Then one afternoon Charles stopped coming. No message, no goodbye. One day his usual chair by the window simply stayed empty, yet Caleb still placed a folded napkin on it, triangle-shaped like always. At first Elena thought he was just busy or tired, but by the fourth day she knew he wasn't coming back. And then on Saturday, just after the lunch shift ended, a man in a pressed suit stepped inside holding a leather-bound folder. He didn't sit, just walked over and asked gently, "Are you Elena Marlowe?" Elena nodded, part anxious, part wary. "Apologies," the man said, opening the folder. "I'm Charles Hawthorne's personal attorney." Her heart tightened. Some of the volunteers looked up but stayed quiet. The lawyer placed a thick envelope on the table. He left behind a simple will. Nothing complicated, just one instruction. He opened the envelope, removed a neatly typed document, signed at the bottom in that familiar, slanted, restrained signature, the same one that had once stirred his tea. "I leave to Elena Marlowe full ownership of the Wellington property and a $2 million trust to fund the Shelter Spoon's operations with no conditions. Not because she is pitiful, but because she is strong enough to keep kindness from fading. Charles H." Elena didn't cry, but her hands trembled so much she nearly dropped the folder. She looked at the numbers. More money than she'd ever imagined, let alone had in her name. "Is he gone?" she asked, voice hoarse. The lawyer shook his head. "No one knows. He emptied his accounts, canceled his ID, and left the area yesterday. He left everything behind. Now, only you know who he really was." Elena sat still. Behind her, Caleb stood unusually quiet. After a moment, he whispered, "Mom, where did he go?" Elena looked at her son, then at the empty chair, still bathed in slanted afternoon sun. "I don't know," she said, "but I think he finally found what he was looking for, and now maybe he's searching for someone else who needs to believe again." The lawyer nodded, leaving behind the paper and a small key. "This is to his personal safety box. He left only one photo inside. The rest he left to you." He bowed slightly, then left. Elena opened the box. Inside, a single faded photo. She was in it, leaning down, handing a bowl of soup to a man curled in the rain. The plastic spoon was slightly tilted. The man's eyes lifted. It was Charles. On the back, one line written in his own hand: "Kindness doesn't need proof. It only needs the right moment." That night, the Shelter Spoon didn't open for guests, but the kitchen lights stayed on. Elena sat by the counter, slowly stirring a pot of vegetable broth. Not because anyone was waiting, just out of habit, the kind that soothes you in the silence. In the back, Caleb had fallen asleep at the prep table, his face pressed against a half-open comic book. Beside him, his box of colored pencils and a few sticky notes he had planned to decorate tomorrow's announcement board with. A soft breeze drifted through the open window, carrying hints of parsley and scallions, filling the kitchen and brushing gently over a single empty chair. The chair Charles used to sit in each morning, sipping tea and reading the paper as if he had never truly left. On the wall, a black and white photo hung in a simple wooden frame, Elena bowing slightly to offer a bowl of soup, a man in a gray coat looking up at her eyes full of things he never needed to say. Beneath it, a wooden plaque carved with the words, "Kindness doesn't need proof. It only needs the right moment." Elena gazed at the photo for a long time, then turned off the stove. She stepped out to the back porch where the narrow alley let in the soft gold of a street lamp and the echo of footsteps from somewhere far off. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Maybe another stranger, maybe another story, or maybe just someone who was hungry not for food but for a meal that didn't come with pity. But tonight she had a kitchen, a place, a small community that didn't ask who you were, only this, "Have you eaten today?" And if someone were to ask, can a person's life truly change because of a single bowl of soup, the answer, quietly glowing beneath the kitchen light, would be yes. Because once upon a time, a single mother with nothing shared what little she had. And now, she holds the door open for all the goodness still trying to come in. This was a story brought to you by SocialJustice, where small actions create life-altering ripples. If Elena's journey touched something in you, don't forget to leave a like, share this story with someone who believes in kindness, and let us know in the comments, when was the last time you helped someone and what did it change in you? We'll see you in the next story where kindness doesn't shout. It simply arrives, right on time. Good night if you're listening in the dark, and a gentle day if you're catching this at dawn. Social justice, telling stories of small things that were never small at all.